Julian Assange's last-ditch appeal against his extradition from the UK to the US began today with crowds of his supporters gathering outside the High Court in protest. The Wikileaks founder is wanted on espionage charges after thousands of classified military and diplomatic documents were published between 2010 and 2011 in one of the biggest data leaks in American history. Assange has been in Belmarsh jail in London since 2019 after he was expelled from the Ecuadorian embassy, where he lived for 7 years to avoid extradition to Sweden on rape charges. In June 2022, the then Home Secretary Priti Patel approved Assange's extradition to the United States. A little earlier today, I spoke to Julian Assange's lawyer, Jennifer Robinson. The Wikileaks founder was too ill to attend court today, so I started by asking her about his health.
Well, obviously the fact that he couldn't even participate remotely to follow the proceedings today shows just the toll that this long drawn-out proceedings and being in Belmarsh, a high-security prison, has had on him, and the prospect and the being at the sharp end of this case and what it would mean for him to be extradited to the United States. The toll that it's having on him is significant.
What was said in court today, then?
So today the court heard our side of the arguments, our arguments on why he should be given permission to appeal. They range from arguments about free speech and the fact that this is the first time in history that a publisher is being prosecuted in the United States for what is journalistic activity. We heard about the fact that Julian shouldn't be extradited because he's being punished and prosecuted for revealing evidence of US criminality, US state criminality. We heard evidence about the fact that the US could potentially extend the death penalty to him if he was to be extradited to the United States, and there's been no assurances that he would not be subjected to that. We also heard evidence about the imbalance between the UK-US treaty and the fact that it's prohibited to be extradited for a political offence, and they're seeking to prosecute him for a political offence. And we say that's not just unlawful, but also an abusive process. OK, I mean, he is allegedly responsible for the largest leaking of military intelligence, I think, ever. And the stats that I have here, correct me if I'm wrong, is that around 90,000 classified US military documents in relation to the Afghanistan war and about 400,000 confidential US files in relation to Iraq. I mean, there has to be some consequences for that, doesn't there? Well, this is protected activity, and this was part of our argument today. There's no evidence that anyone was harmed as a result of these publications. As you quite rightly point out, it's one of the largest leaks of US information in history. It's one of the biggest journalistic scoops in history. It's won journalism awards the world over. Julian himself and Wikileaks. He's been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. The consequences of these publications has been huge in terms of evidence being used in the International Criminal Court, in the European Court of Human Rights, holding governments to account for their crimes. So this was a significant release, but this is protected journalistic activity. No other journalist has been prosecuted in this way before. None of the media partners of Wikileaks who also publish this information are being prosecuted. And this case is a dangerous one for journalists. And as we say, it's the first time in history, and it's crossing a legal threshold that no administration has ever crossed before. You claim to have evidence that there was a kidnap and assassination attempt, or plot, I should say, in relation to Julian. Could you just expand on that a little bit, please? So this was the result of Yahoo News investigative reporting. The story is that the CIA, as directed by President Trump and under Director of CIA Mike Pompeo, had prepared plans to kidnap and kill Julian Assange, to kidnap him. Is this whilst he was in Britain? On British territory. So while he was inside the Ecuadorian embassy, there was a plan put together to kidnap and kill him. There was evidence that we had before the court of a whistleblower, a confidential witness, who said that there was a plan to poison him while he was inside the embassy. And this is the result of journalistic investigations backed up by 35 different internal government sources. And in fact, when the investigation went live, Mike Pompeo said that people ought to be prosecuted for having revealed the information, showing that it was classified information. So it should be concern to anyone that the CIA would plot to do that in this country. And we say that it shows the very political nature of the case and the way in which the CIA is going for him, and the concern that we have of the treatment that he will suffer, Julian Assange, if he is extradited to the United States in these circumstances. Is it true as well that one of the things that you are trying to argue is that he may well end up taking his own life if he's extradited as a result of his mental health? It is in fact the accepted medical evidence. So there was expert evidence before the court in the extradition challenge which showed that because of his particular mental health picture, the depressive illness he suffers because of the many, many years of persecution he's faced, his autistic diagnosis and the oppressive prison conditions he would face if extradited to the United States, he would be placed under special administrative measures, which has been described as the darkest black hole of the US prison system. the combination of these factors would cause him to commit suicide. So when you hear his wife, Stella Assange, talk about this is a matter of life or death for Julian, that is the accepted medical evidence in the courts of this country. And the only reason the Home Secretary is extraditing him because the US gave a conditional assurance saying, don't worry, we won't put him in those prison conditions. And as Amnesty International says, it's not worth the paper it's written on.
Well, why not? Why is that assurance not worth the paper it's written on?
There are numerous cases where we've seen where US has offered diplomatic assurances about the protection of prisoners which have not been respected. And in this case, it's not even a full assurance, it's conditional. And what does that mean? If Julian Assange, once extradited to the United States, does anything that the intelligence services decide justifies placing him under SAMS, we can't challenge that legally. So you're allowing the intelligence services which plotted to kill him the ability to place him in prison conditions that the medical evidence shows would cause his death. You can see why, as his lawyers, we're concerned about that prospect.
I can absolutely see that. I can also see, though, that as far as the American government is concerned, they are or were acting in a theatre of war, and somebody has sought to undermine that. I mean, essentially, they would view him as an enemy of the United States of America and would look to treat him as such.
He's not an enemy of the United States. He's a journalist and a publisher who received information from a source. The source who provided the information to Wikileaks, the alleged source, has already faced prosecution in the United States and was, in fact, had their sentence commuted and has been out of prison for many, many years.
And that person is?
Chelsea Manning, who spent 7 years in prison as a result of the conviction that she faced because of providing this information to Wikileaks. But Julian is a journalist and a publisher. Wikileaks is a publishing organisation. So it's like saying that if you were to publish that information, you are the enemy of the United States. No, you're doing your job as a journalist.
OK. And what kind of message do you think this sends out, really, to the world? We look at a lot of the criticism that we've seen recently of Vladimir Putin, for example, over the Navalny's death. People have drawn comparisons, rightly or wrongly, people have drawn comparisons between the allegations as to what's happened to Navalny over there and potentially the way that the United States government will seek to treat Julian Assange.
I think there are many comparisons. The problem with Julian Assange's case is that what the US government is doing is setting a precedent. And what does that say to the rest of the world? We are going to criminally prosecute and extradite journalists who publish the truth about us for espionage. Any journalist anywhere in the world could face prosecution in the United States. What message does that send to Russia? Now we have Evan Gershkovich, for example, the Wall Street Journal journalist, who's in Russia, facing espionage charges, and you've got the US Secretary of State saying he should be released. And what does Putin say? Don't talk to me about this while you're doing the same to Julian Assange.
One final one with you. With respect, Great Britain does have an allegiance with the United States of America. It does not have an allegiance with Julian Assange. Why should we prioritise Julian over our long-standing special relationship with America?
It's not a question of prioritising Julian Assange over the special relationship. It's about protecting free speech principles. This is not just about Julian Assange. It's the precedent it's setting for all journalists and editors in this country.